everybody. I'm back. Last week we had technical difficulties. I wasn't around, but you did an awesome show. I want to say that this show is going to be pre-recorded, so just in case any breaking news happens and conflicts our stories, that is why it has happened. And I want to, say hello to you, Senator. Today we'll be kind of brushing upon some of the, new information on the Iran war. We kind of saw a ceasefire happen and then an engagement or a terror attack, as we'll go into, with Israel dropping over 100 airstrikes in a limited amount of time on Beirut, kind of have put that into jeopardy. So, Senator, thank you for joining us, and you want to give us an update on all that?
Yes. We had to pre-record this. Tomorrow I'm with a Vietnamese group, along with the former Senator Jim Webb, who was a Vietnam veteran, and we're talking about the tremendous sacrifice by the soldiers of the Republic of Vietnam, and also by other allies who are never mentioned, really, like the South Koreans, who sent a great number. I think there may have been almost 1/3 South Koreans who fought alongside the United States and South Vietnam in defending the country, and also British, not British, but Australians rather. I was involved in a sea and air rescue mission with 2 helicopters out of Chu Lai Airfield in 1966, when the tower called to alert us, and we ran to the helicopters, and there was a B-57 Australian bomber that had been hit by ground fire, turned inverted, and the pilots both ejected. And we had an incredible flight where we flew out, and we had a company of Marines who were being flown from another base to come and help secure the area. There were jets flying in that we were controlling. Myself and a fellow named Dick Mosier, who just passed away recently. We were the 2 pilots, and we came into the landing zone, and we were hit by ground fire in the engine of the helicopter, and when it happened, it caused Dick Mosier, who was at the controls at that moment, to sort of, I don't know, we sort of jumped up a little bit, and it caused us to be high on our final approach, and we sort of desperately tried to slow ourselves down. And by the time we finally got almost stopped, we drifted into a large row of bamboo trees, and hit the trees and sheared off all 4 rotor tips. And just by the grace of God, which is probably part of the reason I'm still here talking on the air, the way that it happened, we just sort of eased slightly into the bamboo, which is very hard wood, actually. Mm-hmm. And it acted almost like a lathe, where the trees cut off the tips of the rotor blades, but it cut them equally, more or less equally. It bent one of the steel spars, but it left the plane reasonably in balance. And while we had flown out, our wingman had gotten an electrical fire. He turned back, and Mosier and I talked about it and decided we're not going to leave the pilots out. We're going in, knowing that if something went wrong, we were just there. There was no rescue. And we just decided, we're not leaving somebody out there. And So from there, we were actually able to sort of regain our composure, get the helicopter uh, moving out, and then we flew just slightly to the side and could see the pilots' uh, parachutes billowing up, and we landed, sent our gunner and crew chief out to recover the two pilots. They were both killed. They were killed on impact. They hadn't been high enough when they ejected. So we got them and flew out with both both machine guns blazing from the sides of the helicopter and flew them back. But in any event, that was my only experience with the Australians from the Royal Australian Air Force. But they were great fighters. Most of them, they fought further south with the South Vietnamese and with the U.S. Army, whereas the Marines tended to be up north because that's where the North Vietnamese were coming across. And so we fought with the sort of the elite troops from the North Vietnamese. But in any event, so I'm going to be giving a speech about some of this tomorrow, and so we'll record this today. So with that, let me get into we're in this situation where we have this rather chaotic thing that we call a ceasefire. It is very tenuous. It is very uncertain what's going to happen. Now, just before the truce was announced, President Trump issued a final ultimatum and said that if Iran did not reopen the Strait of Hormuz, that he would destroy the entire Iranian civilization. He said a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I'm not sure how that would be done short of a nuclear attack.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, nothing like that was done. I think it was just sort of the ultimate bluster to try to compel an agreement by the Iranians. But in any event, the ceasefire was declared. American troops observed the ceasefire. But in an apparent attempt to disrupt the peace talks, just hours after the ceasefire took effect on April 7th, Israel launched a terror bombing campaign on Lebanon. They dropped 100 bomb strikes in just 10 minutes, hitting the capital of Lebanon, Beirut, and other regions, and just continued the merciless slaughter that they've carried out there in Gaza, in the West Bank, everywhere they touch, they're destroying, killing people. The Lebanese Health Ministry reported that over 300 innocent people were killed. About 1,200 were wounded in a single day. Keep in mind the deaths. For people who don't know Lebanon was a heavily Christian country back when Israel was first founded in 1948. They have what's called a confessional government, which means it's a religiously based government. So the president of Lebanon is a Christian, and then you have Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims who have control of other parts of the government. So the deaths of all of these people, and it seemed to be just bombing for the sake of killing, and the deaths included a great many Muslims and a great many Christians, I'm sure, including many women and children. There's no real effort by Israelis to limit the deaths to just combatants. That's not their way of fighting. Remember now with this terror attack on Lebanon immediately after agreeing to a ceasefire, that it is not Israel's goal to end the fighting anywhere. It's Israel's goal to permanently put American troops on the ground fighting in Iran, hopefully on their part for generations to come. Whatever we do, the United States must not let that happen. There has to be some consideration for the American people and the American people's interest. Despite all of the financial power that's wielded by Israel and its allies, somehow we have to have some of our political representatives who will stand up and say, look, we have to take care of the Americans, not just the Israelis. We've got a country to run here. Now, before Trump announced the ceasefire, 2 U.S. jets were shot down by Iran. And only a very massive rescue effort saved the weapons system officer from the downed F-15. He parachuted into Iran, managed to escape up into the mountains, and an immense rescue effort was put in place, during which 6 U.S. aircraft were destroyed. Now this is 6 in addition to the two jets that were downed. There were 2 of these very, very sophisticated C-130 type aircraft. They're built around the C-130 frame, but they're much, much more sophisticated, very expensive aircraft. Those and 4 of the special operations helicopters had to be destroyed on the ground to keep them from being captured by the Iranians. Now, the rescue attempt was successful, and I think Americans, all of us, really heaved a collective sigh of relief at the rescue of that downed airman. But I think the White House jubilation at the heroic rescue underscored just how fragile public support is for this war. Clearly, there was concern that the capture of even a single American airman could destroy any remaining public support for the deadly surprise attack that we launched on Iran. So here's where we stand right now. If we're going to have any hope for peace, then President Trump somehow must rein in Netanyahu. Netanyahu calls the shots. He doesn't always get his way immediately, but one way or the other, he will do things like staging the terror attack to achieve his goals, and this is a problem. Now, this war must end quickly if President Trump doesn't want a really big disaster during the midterm elections, which are coming up in November. So we've got these negotiations underway in Islamabad, Pakistan. Pakistan has hosted the meetings. Now, unfortunately, Witkoff and Kushner are there. I think many people consider both of them to be Israel firsters. Mm-hmm. And they certainly have very heavy focus on what the interest of Israel and Israeli supporters might be financially. But we have Vice President J.D. Vance, who is leading the delegation. and he is viewed by many as an American firster. He is not somebody who has great enthusiasm for the wars. So at least Americans will have some voice during the negotiations.
Yeah, it's I believe it was his name is leaving my mind at the moment, but it was a UK official who came out and actually admitted that they look at Witkoff and Kushner as Israeli assets.
Yeah.
So it's not something that is quite a speculation. It seems to be kind of a known consensus, especially in other forms of government, foreign governments. So that's interesting to look at even our so-called allies, through this engagement that we had in Iran. We had UK institute convene 40 countries together to try and stop the Strait of Hormuz blockade. But who was absent was the U.S. They didn't even invite the U.S., which I think is very telling at this position that we're setting ourselves in. By aligning us with Israel, we're kind of taking this isolation stage that does not seem to be helping us whatsoever. I think it's very interesting that Israel took this meat grinder to essentially the ceasefire right after it was signed. I would hope that maybe our officials, they were blindsided, but we see our officials kind of taking the stance of Israel. We had the ambassador of Pakistan, Sharif, on his X account explicitly stating that the 10-point ceasefire included American and its allies and also Iran and its allies, which would include Lebanon. But we see characters like J.D. Vance kind of siding with Israel and saying that we shouldn't have looked at this ceasefire with including Lebanon. I'm just going to play a short clip of him. I think this was Wednesday.
Iran wants to let this negotiation fall apart in a conflict where they were getting hammered over Lebanon, which has nothing to do with them and which the United States never once said was part of the ceasefire. That's ultimately their choice. We think that would be dumb, but that's their choice.
I find this very unfortunate because we're taking the stance where clearly the ceasefire, we didn't want our allies to be hit, the other Middle Eastern nations where American bases reside. But to have that position where Iran can't have the same position, given, I think we talked about backstage, their negotiating leverage is rather high, even though we have some, American pundits who are trying to persuade the American people otherwise, with them having control over the Strait of Hormuz, which controls 20% of the petroleum exports for the entire world. Primarily, they go to Japan and Europe, and pardon me, I can't remember another nation that
South Korea, China, and anyway, the Asian countries, are reliant. Some of them as much as 70% of all their oil. In fact, I think just today, Japan has released oil from its national petroleum reserves, so that they can keep the wheels of industry running. China has a very large petroleum reserve, so I don't think they're going to be in quite the pinch. South Korea is in a very desperate situation.
And Japan,
I suspect countries like Vietnam, which does a lot of the kind of China's offshore production, so that China can export to us through somebody. I'm sure, all energy has to be imported to Vietnam. So they are certainly going to feel the pinch. But all through, Indonesia, different places, it comes through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah. Which we were telling you backstage, I have a little segment of a Fox News clip where they are kind of trying to hoodwink the American people into thinking that Iran have no power in the negotiation stage, but then kind of contradicts himself in the next sentence. So let me just go ahead.
Iranians lack leverage at the negotiating table, and once again, this is why they are trying to put pressure on the Strait of Hormuz, where around 20% of the world's oil exports actually pass through. And if they continue to do this, it's an indication that they're not willing to make an agreement. This was one of the reasons that the entire region plunged into this conflict, not just the nuclear issue and their pursuit of a nuclear weapon, but also their efforts to try and choke off the global energy trade. And so the Strait of Hormuz will be incredibly critical, and what the Iranians say in the days ahead will be very important. They're trying to put out a lot of propaganda and try to spin the negotiators ahead of this meeting in Islamabad, and if they're able to do so, it again is an indication that they are not serious about keeping the strait open. Absolutely, the Iranian.
So I find that a bit frustrating, because that is kind of the, while it is in decline, those news sources at, CNN, Fox News, a lot less people watch those. You do have a considerable amount of people that is where they get their news.
Yeah, it's interesting what he said, that one of the reasons for the war, I guess, was that they've always been kind of a threat to the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has never once threatened the Strait of Hormuz, and they presented zero threat of any sort to the Strait of Hormuz until we attacked them. So that is just categorically false. It's just, there are so many things that the mainstream media could just throw on the table and make these bold, unbacked assertions with no facts whatsoever. Just total lies, because people don't know what foreign countries are doing. It's just too complicated. And unless you happen to spend an inordinate amount of time on these things like you and I do, then you just don't know. They say, oh, yeah, it's a threat to the Strait of Hormuz. No, it's not a threat. And it never has been a threat. So this was a wake-up call. And it did not become a threat, because the Ayatollah, I hate to break their bubble. The Ayatollah was a moderate. He was not an extremist. He was an old man. I think I've mentioned before, I've only had one contact with him. It was long ago, and I didn't initiate it, but he was listening to some of the many broadcasts that I made about the war in Syria. And I happen to have mentioned an opportunity that was a missed opportunity for Iran as they were trying to solidify support for the JCPOA under Obama. I supported Obama's effort with that, although I didn't support Obama on much of anything else. But I said, there had been a U.S. boat that had drifted into Iranian waters. It was sent out by a U.S. warship. Not clear whether it was just a mechanical problem or whether it was a spy mission. But in any event, the Iranians captured it. It was a very sensitive time for Iran. The U.S. was trying to put together a more peaceful arrangement with them. And I thought it was very unfortunate. The Iranians who seized the boat went aboard, and they treated the American sailors in a very demeaning, humiliating way. And so I was critical of that. I said, what a missed opportunity. They could have gone on there, whether it was a spy boat or whether it was a real deal. Who cares? Just go on there and shake hands with American sailors, slap them on the back and wave at the cameras, and then tow the boat back under the shadow of the American warship and help them go up into the ship and stand there and wave. It would have been a spectacular PR victory for Iran, and they missed it. So this wasn't a big deal, but I just happened to mention it in passing. And the Ayatollah's secretary contacted my secretary and ended up, sending me messages to the effect that, you need to understand that Iran is a very complex society with many competing interest groups and power, well, not interest groups, but power centers is what, and that it's not that easy to just say, oh, well, let's just do this. And I thought it was a very good point. And, and I acknowledged that I had received it and that I understood. Never had another contact with him. But that's not the kind of thing that some wild-eyed extremist does, is to say, I just want to, just convey my understanding of Iran to someone who has, perhaps not the same understanding. A pretty reasonable thing to do. And, this is the same Ayatollah who worked with the United States to orchestrate a very smooth, diplomatic, face-saving end to our 12-day war. So this was not an extremist, but what happened is that the Israeli murder campaign, the assassination campaign, has wiped out a whole generation of more mature, seasoned men who have come to balance various interests and concerns and to understand that mistakes have been made in the past. And so now you have a young, dynamic, less gullible group that can look and say, okay, well, we did peace deals before, and both of them were used as nothing more than pretext to launch attacks on Iran. Mm-hmm. So the this business of the assassinations, it may seem very shrewd to the Israelis, and I nothing is more unnerving than this incessant discussion out of the Pentagon and the White House about, well, we killed these, we killed those, we've done assassinations in the past. We did them in Vietnam, and they were very carefully hidden from view. But they're nothing to be proud of, and this is not the kind of thing that military glory is built on, as assassination. Mm-hmm. So, in any event, that's we're finding that the support for the war is very tenuous, and we've got MAGA supporters: Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Alex mm-hmm. Jones, Candace Owens, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are openly and bitterly opposed to the war. We look at NATO, and President Trump is very angry that they won't jump in and join this war, but they're not going to grab our tar baby. It's a clear loser for them, and they do not want to jump in and years from now have to hear from the Iranian government, well, you jumped in against us when the chips were down. Yeah,
I was trying to source out a video. There's this video that had been going viral on Tehran, it looking like a neighborhood in Brooklyn, and see if I can get it to in that audio, but it's just mm-hmm. I was able to find it, and I don't know if you kind of heard that in the background, but you have women who are not, don't have to conceal their hair. You have nice cars. The cities are clean. Or we're supposed to be told that is, we're supposed to be bringing them some kind of new world so they can live in peace, that they seem to be living lot cleaner than a lot of the neighborhoods that I've witnessed in New York as of late.
Yes.
So,
well, well, I shouldn't say that, but anyway, when you compare it with some of the places in New York, I thought, oh gosh, maybe you're going to show something that's not very good. It's very clean. It's very modern. The people are highly intelligent, and for everyday Americans, it would surprise them to know that if you went to a party and a third of the people in the party were Iranians, you might never realize that there were any foreigners there. I mean, if they didn't speak with accents, they look like you, they look like me. They don't tend to do extreme things. Now, there's no doubt there are very deeply religious Shia Muslims who, the women feel that it's appropriate to be dressed, in Islamic garb. That's fine.
Yeah, there's still like a culture there, that is based in religious belief, but they have Jewish, they have, I think over 300 synagogues in Iran. I can't remember the how many churches they have, but they have plenty of churches.
Yeah.
And this was a dermatologist. He's local to the area. He ran as a libertarian in this past election, but he had been invited because he's a very well known in dermatology to Iran, and he's a Jewish man. And he said that is when he was confronted with the conflicting views of American propaganda to what was actually real on the ground, is that he was in this meeting and it was near time for prayer. And he said one of his colleagues turned to him and said, there's a synagogue right around the block. Why don't you, go and, do your daily worship and then come back and, finish the workday. And said he went there. But the most perplexing thing that he had seen was that this was the first synagogue that he had entered without an armed guard. He goes to synagogues all the time in America, and they have armed guards, with the big weapons. And he said this was the first time that he had gone into a synagogue, and it was just, it seemed very open to the public. He said children were playing, and it really made him feel conflicted with what he had been told in the news about how to feel about how he would have been perceived as a Jewish person in Iran. So I carried that story with me a long time because I thought that was very powerful, that, here where we are taught this freedom of religion, this acceptance, he had just known his entire life a body of worship to have this armed guard in front of it because it might not be safe, as opposed to him going to this other country where he is, crammed down his throat during American media that he's hated, he'll be, abused in so many different ways. He goes to a synagogue there, and it's, one of the only times that he, wasn't confronted with an armed guard. So I found that to be an interesting anecdote that he had told me.
Yeah, I would say that probably there's greater Christian freedom in Iran than there is in Israel.
Yeah, I think Israel just extended a new settlement that included the Palestinian Christian community. So all of them have to vacate or they'll be forcefully removed. And that displaces the entire Christian community in Palestine.
Yeah, the Israeli government has always been hostile towards Christians, and they're not very outward about it. But when they expelled all of the Palestinians from their land, a considerable number of the Palestinians were Christians. Mm-hmm. And no one ever talks about that because they always want it to seem like, some hostile group of Muslims against these peaceful Israelis. But the fact is that there were lots of Jewish people who lived in Palestine. There were lots of Christians who lived there, and then the largest group was the Muslims. Mm-hmm. And it was after the Second World War that you had a large stream of European Jewish people who went to Palestine, and then they were very violent people, and everybody had lived harmoniously, Jews, Christians, Muslims, but the newcomers from Europe were very aggressive, and they were determined that they were going to get some land, they were going to get some farms, they were going to get some businesses, they were going to get some homes, and they were not going to just simply go to work and earn them. They were going to steal them, and that was the foundation of Israeli society. Now, it's interesting, with what you saw in Iran, in Syria, which, took us 13 years to collapse their government. In Syria, they had very large Jewish communities. And it was under Jimmy Carter that Israel recalled all of the Jews to Israel and eliminated them from Syria. Now, the Syrians never pushed Jews out. They never were hostile to Jews. And in fact, afterwards, the government there very carefully maintained the abandoned Jewish homes. They never allowed Syrians to just go in and occupy and take them over, because they wanted to maintain the proper ownership of those homes in sort of the Jewish line of succession. So throughout the Middle East, the Jews have been very well treated for the most part. Now, if you go back to ancient times, the beginning of the Islamic Revolution, that was a different matter. But in the last 100 years or so, Jews have prospered. They've done well. They've been accepted in all of these countries, and part of the illusion that's created that's behind the Israeli push is this idea that somehow you have all these people who are being mean to Jewish people and taking advantage, and that just is not the case, as you saw in Iran and I saw in Syria. So your friends. So
we have the peace talks that'll be happening Saturday, potentially right around the same time that our show would have been airing. So maybe we can get some speculation on that. I know that we have spoken about this in the past. Is this sort of playbook that the American government has been taken from Israel? Is this ploy of we're in negotiations while we resituate ourselves and then we do an attack? There has been speculation of the fact that you had the Marine Expeditionary Units. I think there were together it was like 1,000. It was, I can't remember the amount of men. Far too little to be a ground invasion.
Yeah, they're more like 5,000 of them. There are a couple thousand.
Okay.
Of the 82nd Airborne, and then we had 50,000 troops of various types in Middle Eastern Gulf countries, but that's not necessarily people who can be used as infantry.
Okay, yeah. So I was making sure kind of your takes on that kind of, because I've heard some pundits are speculating on the fact that you do have 50,000 troops in the area, more influx of troops they're wanting to send there. You had the Iron Dome defense missiles were being depleted at a significant rate. So they're kind of speculating that this kind of comes at that time where you have Israel and America trying to re-get some arsenal back before they kind of try and start a escalation again. What is your take on that?
That is possible, and I'm sure that they will be rearming, resupplying. Kind of inevitable. I think the one thing that puts pressure on the United States to take this seriously is that we really are running a risk of a global recession if the Strait of Hormuz stays shut. In a 24-hour period on Wednesday, only 7 of a normal 140 ship passages took place. That means there's about 5% of the normal traffic that's passing through.
Mm-hmm.
And the fertilizer that is used in spring planting in many places, including Africa, India, the fertilizer is blocked. And so unless the fertilizer gets out fairly soon, it virtually guarantees a shortage, a food shortage around the world, which is going to drive up food prices everywhere, including the United States. So there is pressure on the U.S. not to be simply not to use it like we did the last two, peace talks where they were just fake, and we were just there getting people in position for a surprise attack. The Japanese had people in Washington talking peace while they were proceeding to gather forces to attack Pearl Harbor. And how serious they were about the negotiation. My guess is the Japanese were more serious about the negotiations than we were with our negotiation. But I suspect that these may be serious because the president sees his coalition coming unglued. I know at Mar-a-Lago they're very aware of the fact that the Republican Party has major fractions internally, and there's a lot of pressure to make something happen. Mm-hmm. So one thing, Iran is in the process right now of charging $2 million tolls for passage through the Straits of Hormuz, and they're requiring it to be paid in Chinese currency, the yuan. Now, this hasn't got much news, but it threatens to promote a shift over time towards not a petrodollar, but a petro-yuan. Mm-hmm. Now, it's complex the way that the petrodollar works, but it's what we substituted as the backing for our currency when we did away with the gold standard. And it's worked magnificently, and it's critical to the United States because the petrodollar allows us to run a ballooning, reckless deficit while staving off a catastrophic financial collapse. If the oil is traded in Chinese currency instead of the dollar, that's a real problem for the United States. So a potential negotiating position would be to allow Iran to control the strait, which they do right now, and to impose the tolls, which they do, but to say, okay, you could do it, but it has to be paid in dollars and not in the Chinese currency, so that it relieves some of the threat on the petrodollar. Mm-hmm. We'll see, and I have no idea what we will do, but I'm sure that these tolls collected in Chinese currency are a big concern in the White House.
Yeah, certainly it is. There's a lot more players in this ring than mainstream media, and different elements will have you be knowledgeable about. So I know that we're kind of wrapping up the show now, Senator. I know that next week we'll have the show hopefully live, and we'll bring you more information on the peace talks that happen in Islamabad, Pakistan, that are taking place on tomorrow. But is there any kind of closing remarks that you want to make before we close out the show?
Yeah, now it's hard to say. We may end up having to do a recorded show next week also because
You're very busy, so yeah.
I'm traveling to a reunion of the survivors of Fox Company 1st Marine Regiment, who were almost all wounded at the time that I was wounded, and we had huge casualties, 34 men killed and perhaps as many as 80 wounded out of a group of 190 Marines. A very heroic group that won the first Medal of Honor in a string of 7 posthumous Medals of Honor during battles in the Quezon Valley that began with our company and continued for a lengthy period of time against the 2nd North Vietnamese Division. So anyway, so I'm going to be going to that, and we'll have to make some arrangements and see what the schedule allows. But in any event, between now and then, hopefully we'll have some resolution that may reopen the Strait of Hormuz and relieve the pressure on the people of all the world.
Yeah.
And we will simply see how things progress in Islamabad.
Certainly. Well, join us next week to focus on the news. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you, Morgan.